Story 1. I was cleaning out my garage when I found this old ladder my dad used to fix everything around the house. It was rusty, wobbly, and should have been retired 20 years ago. But of course, I decided it was still good enough. I climbed up to fix a broken gutter, and as soon as I reached the top, the thing gave out. I fell backward, fully prepared to kiss the pavement goodbye, when my fall was broken by something soft. Turns out, my neighbor's trampoline had been moved into their driveway for their kids' party that morning. I bounced twice, rolled off, and landed in their bushes, completely unharmed. My neighbor came running out, yelling, "Best entrance ever!" while I just lay there trying to figure out how I wasn't dead. Edit. My neighbor actually sent me a video later. The bounce was even more embarrassing than I remembered. Story 2. A few years ago, I worked in construction. One day, while operating a crane, the machine malfunctioned and started tipping forward. I jumped out, but not fast enough to avoid getting caught by the edge of the cab as it fell. I was pinned and couldn't breathe, certain that I was seconds away from getting crushed. Then, the crane stopped moving. Completely. When my team finally got me out, they showed me what saved me. A single 2x4 lodged in just the right place, holding up the weight of the entire crane. A literal piece of scrap wood stopped a disaster. My boss called it divine intervention. I called it quitting time. Story 3. It was supposed to be a quick kayak trip down the river. The water looked calm, and I was feeling invincible. That was until I hit the rapids. My kayak flipped, I got trapped underwater, and panic set in. The current dragged me for what felt like forever until I finally surfaced. Right into a fallen tree branch that caught my life vest. That branch saved me from drowning, but I had to hang on to it for 20 minutes until someone found me. The rescue team said I was incredibly lucky. Personally, I think the river was just tired of trying to kill me. Story 4. I was at a carnival with my friends, and of course, we had to try the giant Ferris wheel. Halfway up, there was this weird creaking sound. Before anyone could react, our gondola jolted, and the door flew open. My friend screamed, I almost slipped out, and for a solid 5 seconds, I thought, this is how it ends. Then, the operator stopped the wheel, and a couple of workers climbed up to secure us. When we got down, one of the workers said, "Good thing you didn't lean forward. That door's been acting up." Acting up? I nearly acted out a whole funeral. Story 5. I was on a morning jog in the city when a random man started shouting. I turned around just in time to see a massive street sign falling straight toward me. I froze. The next thing I knew, I was tackled to the ground. The man had thrown himself into me, knocking us both out of the way. The sign hit the ground inches from my head. He got up, dusted himself off, and said, "You owe me a coffee." I actually bought him one, but he left before I could even get his name. Story 6. I was hiking with my dog on a trail I'd done dozens of times before. It was a quiet morning, and we hadn't seen anyone else for miles. Suddenly, my dog froze, staring at something in the bushes. Before I could react, a mountain lion leapt out. I froze like an idiot while my dog started barking like she was auditioning to be a hero in an action movie. Somehow, that barking scared the lion off, but not before it snarled and took a swipe at me. Its claws missed my leg by inches, and I swear I felt the wind from it. My dog stayed between me and the lion until it disappeared into the trees. I spent the rest of the hike clutching a stick like it was Excalibur, and whispering to my dog, "You're getting so many treats." Story 7. I was on a tiny boat with a group of friends, heading out for what was supposed to be a fun fishing trip. The weather forecast was clear, but halfway through the trip, a freak storm rolled in. The waves started tossing the boat around, and I went flying into the water. The life jacket helped keep me afloat, but the current was so strong that I got separated from the boat. Just as I started to panic, a piece of debris floated by. A random chunk of wood big enough for me to grab onto. I clung to it for dear life while my friends frantically tried to turn the boat around. They eventually got me back, but I still have nightmares about being in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but that piece of wood keeping me alive. Story 8. I was fixing my roof after a storm had knocked a tree branch onto it. I had one of those ladder stabilizers, but I guess I didn't set it up right because halfway through hammering in a shingle, the ladder shifted. I lost my balance and started falling backward. It wasn't a short fall either. It was straight into my driveway. Just as I was bracing for impact, I hit something soft. My neighbor had left an inflatable pool cover out to dry, and it was right where I landed. It didn't pop, and I didn't even sprain anything. When I told my neighbor what happened, she just said, "Glad my lazy storage habits came in handy." Story 9. It was a regular morning, and I was brushing my teeth when I suddenly smelled gas. At first, I thought it was nothing, but the smell kept getting stronger. I went to the kitchen and found that the burner on the stove was slightly turned on, releasing gas into the house. I must have bumped it the night before without realizing. Right as I turned it off, my phone buzzed, and I instinctively picked it up. The message? My roommate asking if I could light a candle to freshen up the place. I froze, realizing how close I'd come to blowing up the entire house. My hands were shaking for the rest of the day. Story 10. I was skiing with my family during winter break when I decided to try one of the steeper slopes. It wasn't long before I lost control and started sliding down at full speed. I couldn't stop, and I was heading straight for a group of trees. Just before I hit, I managed to turn slightly, and instead of hitting the tree trunk head-on, I clipped a branch and spun out into a pile of fresh snow. My leg hurt, but it wasn't broken, and I avoided what could have been a disaster. Edit. When I told my mom about the tree incident, she said, "Well, at least you didn't hit it like a cartoon character." Thanks, Mom. Super comforting. Story 11. I was at the beach with friends, soaking up the sun, when someone suggested renting jet skis. Seemed harmless, right? 15 minutes in, I was speeding across the waves, feeling invincible until I hit a rogue wave. The jet ski flipped, and I got thrown into the water like a rag doll. The problem? I wasn't wearing the safety lanyard, so the jet ski didn't shut off. It kept going, circling around me like a shark. I was trying to tread water and avoid getting hit when out of nowhere, a surfer paddled over and pulled me onto his board. He rowed us both back to shore, looking like a superhero while I coughed up half the ocean. My friends were laughing, calling it epic, but I've never been near a jet ski again. Story 12. I was driving through a snowstorm, trying to get home before the roads got worse. Visibility was horrible, and I could barely see the taillights of the car in front of me. Suddenly, the car in front spun out, and I hit the brakes, but my tires lost traction. My car slid sideways, heading straight for a guardrail. I was sure I was going over the edge, but somehow, the snowbank absorbed the impact and stopped me just in time. When I got out to check, the guardrail was mangled, but my car barely had a scratch. A passing snowplow driver stopped and said, "You must have had an angel riding shotgun." Story 13. It was a family camping trip, and we were roasting marshmallows around the fire when my younger brother thought it'd be funny to throw a can of bug spray into the flames. I heard the hiss and realized what he'd done just in time to yell, "Run!" We all scattered as the can exploded, sending burning embers everywhere. One ember landed right on the blanket I had been sitting on 2 seconds earlier. If I hadn't gotten up when I did, I would have been the marshmallow. My brother? Grounded for life. Well, for the weekend, at least. Story 14. I was biking down a steep hill, pushing for more speed because apparently I thought I was in a race. Just as I was reaching the bottom, my front tire hit a rock and the handlebars jerked. I flew over the front of the bike like a missile, expecting to face plant into the asphalt. Instead, I landed in a giant pile of leaves someone had just raked up. It completely broke my fall, and I walked away with nothing but a bruised ego. The homeowner came out, looked at the leaves and said, "Guess I'll rake them again." Story 15. I was waiting at a crosswalk, scrolling on my phone, when I heard tires screeching. I looked up just in time to see a car speeding straight toward the curb. My body froze, but someone behind me grabbed my backpack and yanked me out of the way. The car smashed into a trash can right where I'd been standing. When I turned to thank the person who saved me, they were already halfway down the street. Whoever they were, they probably saved my life. Edit. My mom called me after I told her and said, "This is why I always told you to stop staring at your phone outside." Moms are never wrong, are they? Story 16. I was visiting my cousin's farm for the first time, feeling like a city slicker in the middle of nowhere. They told me to stay clear of the bullpen, but of course, curiosity got the better of me. I leaned over the fence to get a closer look, and that's when the bull decided I wasn't welcome. It charged the fence at full speed, and the wood cracked like a toothpick. I panicked and bolted, tripping over my own feet as the bull burst through. Just as I thought I was about to become a human pancake, my cousin showed up with a tractor and honked the horn. The bull veered off, giving me just enough time to crawl under another fence. I spent the rest of the weekend helping with chores from a safe distance. Story 17. I was out for a late-night walk when I noticed someone following me. At first I thought I was imagining it, but every time I turned, they were a little closer. I ducked into a side street, trying to lose them, but they followed. Just as I started to really panic, a random dog came out of nowhere and started barking like crazy. The person took one look at the dog and bolted. The dog hung around until I made it home safely, then wandered off. I've never been more grateful for a stray. Story 18. I was climbing a rock wall at an indoor gym when I got cocky and decided to take the expert route. About halfway up, I lost my grip and started falling. The safety rope didn't catch right away, and I thought I was going to hit the ground. Somehow, the belay system kicked in just in time, stopping me a foot from the mat. My instructor yelled, "That's why we double-check!" Yeah, maybe I'll stick to beginner walls from now on. Edit. After that, my friends started calling me Crash every time we went climbing. I guess I earned it. Story 19. I was running late for work, so I skipped breakfast and grabbed a coffee to go. As I stepped off the curb, a bike courier zoomed past, missing me by what felt like millimeters. I stumbled backward, spilling my coffee everywhere, and the courier shouted something that definitely wasn't an apology. If I'd been a step further, I would have been roadkill. That was the day I decided being late isn't worth dying for. Story 20. I was visiting an amusement park with my friends, and we decided to ride the biggest roller coaster there. As the ride started climbing, I noticed that my seatbelt was loose. I tried to signal the attendant, but they didn't see me, and by the time I could say anything, we were at the top. I held on for dear life, praying I wouldn't fly out. When the ride finally stopped, the operator said, "Oh, that one's been tricky all day." Tricky? I almost became a cautionary tale. My friends laughed, but I haven't been on a coaster since. Story 21. I was snorkeling for the first time during a tropical vacation, feeling pretty good about myself. The guide had warned us not to go too far from the group, but I got distracted chasing a brightly colored fish. Before I knew it, I'd wandered into deeper water, and suddenly a shadow passed under me. I froze, thinking it was a shark. It wasn't. It was a huge jellyfish, and I was swimming right toward it. My flippers tangled, and I started panicking. Just as I thought I was going to drift into its tentacles, a current pushed me sideways, carrying me out of its path. I swam back to the group so fast I could have qualified for the Olympics. The guide told me later it was a box jellyfish, one of the deadliest. Needless to say, I didn't go back in the water. Story 22. I was waiting for the subway late at night, standing near the edge of the platform because I'm one of those people who likes to see it coming. Big mistake. As the train approached, someone bumped into me. Hard. I stumbled forward, my foot just brushing the edge of the platform. Another inch, and I'd have fallen right onto the tracks. A guy nearby grabbed my arm and yanked me back so fast I barely processed what happened. When I turned to thank him, he just said, "Pay attention next time," and walked off. I don't know if it was an accident or if someone actually tried to push me, but I've been standing far back ever since. Story 23. I was driving with a friend on a road trip when we decided to take a shortcut through a country road. It was late, the road was dark, and we were joking about how creepy it felt. Then, as we rounded a bend, a deer bolted onto the road. I swerved to avoid it and ended up skidding off into a ditch. The car stopped just inches from a massive tree. Neither of us was hurt, but the deer stood there staring like it was judging my driving skills. We laughed it off, but I still get nervous every time I see a deer crossing sign. Edit. After we got back home, my friend made a playlist for road trips. First song? Hit the Road Jack. Hilarious. Story 24. I was volunteering at a summer camp and helping some kids roast marshmallows over the campfire. One kid dropped his stick, and without thinking, I leaned forward to grab it. The log shifted, and sparks flew up, landing right where I had been sitting. The other counselor shouted, "Watch out!" and pulled me back before I even realized what was happening. The kids thought it was part of the activity, like I'd planned a fire safety demo. Nope. Just me almost getting flambéed in front of a dozen first graders. Story 25. I was walking my dog in the park one evening when she started barking at something in the bushes. I assumed it was a squirrel until I saw the glint of eyes reflecting back at me. It was a coyote, and it wasn't alone. 3 more appeared, circling us. My dog started growling, and I held her leash tight, praying they'd just go away. Out of nowhere, a park ranger drove by, and the headlights scared the coyotes off. The ranger rolled down the window and said, "Be careful, this is their territory." Their territory? Pretty sure my dog and I almost became dinner. Story 26. I was out jogging at dawn, enjoying the quiet streets before the chaos of the day began. Turning a corner, I noticed a garbage truck reversing down the alley. I thought nothing of it until the driver started shouting and waving frantically. I froze, confused, just as a heavy metal dumpster rolled down the slope, heading straight for me. My brain short-circuited, and all I could do was stand there. At the last possible second, a random cyclist grabbed my arm and yanked me out of the way. The dumpster slammed into a wall, missing me by inches. I turned to thank my savior, but they just nodded and rode off like they do this kind of thing every day. I spent the rest of my jog questioning my survival instincts. Story 27. I was at an amusement park with my younger brother when we decided to try the water rapids ride. About halfway through, our raft spun around and we got stuck under a waterfall. The water was pouring down so hard I couldn't breathe, and our raft started tilting dangerously. I thought we were about to flip when a park employee appeared on a nearby platform. He threw a rope into the water, and somehow we managed to grab it and pull ourselves out of the worst spot. My brother thought it was the coolest part of the ride, but I've never been so happy to touch dry land. Story 28. I was helping my uncle with some DIY renovations in his old house. We were tearing down a wall when suddenly the ceiling above us sagged. A massive wooden beam came crashing down, and I was directly in its path. My uncle tackled me out of the way, and the beam smashed into the floor where I'd been standing. It left a dent so big you could have fit a bowling ball in it. My uncle laughed and said, "Guess I saved your life. That means you owe me a beer." Fair enough. Edit. He's been milking that "owe me a beer" thing for years now. Every time we meet, he brings it up. Story 29. I was walking home from a friend's party late at night when I realized I'd taken a wrong turn. The street was completely deserted, and I started hearing footsteps behind me. I glanced back and saw someone walking way too close for comfort. My heart was racing as I picked up the pace, but so did they. Just as I was about to break into a run, a car pulled up beside me, and the driver rolled down the window. It was my friend, who had decided to follow me to make sure I got home safely. The person following me turned down another street, and my friend said, "Thought you might need a ride. You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't tell her how close she probably was to the truth. Story 30. I was kayaking alone on a calm lake when I spotted an island and decided to paddle over. Halfway there, the weather turned on me. Dark clouds rolled in, and the wind picked up out of nowhere. Waves started forming, and my kayak tipped dangerously with every gust. A speedboat happened to be passing by, and the driver saw me struggling. He pulled up, tossed me a rope, and towed me back to shore. I thanked him profusely, and he just said, "Better to be lucky than good." I couldn't agree more. Story 31. I was helping my dad fix the roof on our old shed. We were almost done when I accidentally stepped on a loose shingle. The next thing I knew, I was sliding off the edge, flailing like a cartoon character. I barely managed to grab the gutter, but it bent under my weight, and I was hanging there, staring down at the concrete below. My dad shouted, "Hold on!" and ran to grab a ladder. As he set it up, the gutter gave way, and I fell. straight onto a pile of hay my dad had dumped there earlier while clearing out the shed. It broke my fall completely. My dad laughed and said, "You're the luckiest klutz I've ever seen." Story 32. I was on a road trip with friends, driving through the desert late at night. The car broke down in the middle of nowhere, and our phones had no signal. We decided to wait it out, hoping another car would pass. Hours later, just as we were running out of water, a truck appeared in the distance. The driver pulled over, handed us bottles of water, and even had a spare part to fix our car. He didn't ask for anything in return, just said, "Be safe," and drove off. To this day, we call him our desert guardian angel. 33. I was in my college chemistry lab when I accidentally knocked over a beaker of some unidentified liquid. It hit the floor with a loud crash, and the chemical fumes started rising immediately. My professor yelled for everyone to evacuate while I stood there frozen, panicking. Before I could inhale too much, one of my lab partners grabbed me and practically dragged me out the door. The professor later told us that the fumes were mildly toxic and could have caused serious breathing issues. I owe that lab partner a coffee, maybe a lifetime supply. Edit. They still call me fumes in group chats. I guess it's better than toxic. Story 34. I was in a small town visiting my grandparents when I decided to go for a walk near the train tracks. I'd just crossed them when I heard a train horn blaring. I turned around and saw someone on the tracks, headphones in, completely oblivious. Without thinking, I ran back and pulled them off just as the train sped by. They looked at me, shocked, and muttered, "Thanks," before walking off like nothing happened. I was left standing there, heart pounding, wondering why some people tempt fate for fun. Story 35. I was fishing with my uncle on a boat in the middle of the lake when he decided to show me how to cast farther. He swung his rod back, but the hook caught my shirt. Before I could react, he yanked it forward and I flew into the water. The current started pulling me under, and I couldn't find my footing. My uncle jumped in, grabbed me by the back of my shirt, and hauled me back into the boat. I coughed up half the lake and glared at him while he muttered, "My bad." Needless to say, I haven't been fishing since. Story 36. I was on a family trip to a national park, and we decided to check out a trail that led to a cliffside viewpoint. The hike was peaceful until we got to the edge, where I leaned over to take a picture. A sudden gust of wind hit me, and I lost my balance. I stumbled forward, flailing, but somehow my mom grabbed my hoodie and yanked me back just in time. I dropped my phone over the edge, but at least it wasn't me. My mom's only comment? Guess you'll pay attention next time. Lesson learned. Cliffs and selfies don't mix. Story 37. I was stuck in a massive traffic jam on a bridge during rush hour, inching forward painfully slowly. Suddenly, the car in front of me swerved violently, and I saw why. A huge metal beam had fallen off a construction truck and was sliding across the lanes toward my car. I hit the brakes, but I couldn't stop in time. The beam scraped the front of my car and came to a stop just inches from my windshield. My car was scratched, but I wasn't hurt. The driver of the truck didn't even notice and just kept going. It took me weeks to stop flinching every time I saw a construction vehicle. Story 38. I was riding a horse for the first time during a vacation, thinking it was going to be one of those relaxing, picture-perfect moments. That changed when the horse suddenly spooked at a bird flying out of the bushes. It bolted, and I had no idea how to control it. I held on for dear life, screaming while the guide shouted instructions I couldn't hear over my own panic. Just as I thought I was about to fall, the horse stopped dead in its tracks. Apparently, it had decided it was done running. I slid off, shaking, and swore I'd never ride a horse again. Edit. My friends now send me horse memes every time we talk about that trip. Hilarious. Story 39. I was on a boat tour with friends when the guide decided to take us closer to a group of dolphins. Everyone was leaning over the edge, trying to get pictures, when a huge wave hit the boat. I lost my footing and went straight into the water. The current was surprisingly strong, and I started panicking. Thankfully, one of the crew threw a life ring out to me, and I managed to grab it. They hauled me back onto the boat, and I spent the rest of the tour wrapped in a blanket, vowing never to try, up close, wildlife photography Again. Story 40. I was climbing a ladder to hang holiday lights on my house, and everything seemed fine, until I felt the ladder wobble. Before I knew it, the ladder slid sideways, and I was falling fast. I landed on the grass, missing the concrete walkway by just a few inches. My neighbor rushed over and said, "You okay? That looked like something out of a comedy movie." I laughed it off, but I felt like I just dodged a major bullet. Now, I hire someone to hang the lights every year. No shame in playing it safe. Story 41. I was walking home from the store, arms full of groceries, when I decided to take a shortcut through an alley. Halfway through, I heard the sound of something falling behind me. I turned around and saw a chunk of metal piping had fallen from a construction site above, right where I had been standing seconds earlier. The worker yelled, "Watch out!" A little too late, and I just stared at the pipe on the ground, my heart pounding. If I hadn't stopped to adjust the bags in my hands moments before, that thing would have hit me square on the head. I spent the rest of the walk home thanking whatever cosmic force was looking out for me. Story 42. It was my first time on a zip line, and I was already nervous. As I started gliding, everything seemed fine, until I noticed the harness loosening. I yelled for help, but I was too far from the platform for anyone to do anything. My hands clutched the strap so tightly that I thought they'd break, and I just kept repeating, "Don't fall, don't fall." Somehow, I made it to the other side without the harness giving out completely. The instructor's only comment? "Yeah, that one's due for replacement." Great, thanks for the heads up. Story 43. I was biking down a steep hill when my brakes decided to betray me. I squeezed the handles, but nothing happened, and I was gaining speed fast. The road ahead curved sharply, with a row of parked cars on one side and a drop-off on the other. I was sure I was about to crash when I spotted a grassy patch just ahead. I veered off, jumped the curb, and bailed into the grass, rolling to a stop. My bike was banged up, but I was okay, minus the bruises and a few scratches. Now, I check my brakes religiously before every ride. Edit. My friends still joke that I should start a How Not to Die While Biking YouTube channel. Maybe they're onto something. Story 44. I was at a friend's barbecue, standing near the grill, when the propane tank started making a weird hissing noise. Before anyone could react, the grill erupted into flames. Everyone ran, but I froze, too stunned to move. My friend's dad grabbed me and pulled me back just before the flames shot higher. The fire department showed up, and it turns out the hose on the tank had a crack in it. I still get jumpy around grills, and I've made a personal rule: let someone else do the cooking. Story 45. I was swimming at the beach, enjoying the waves, when I suddenly felt something brush against my leg. Looking down, I saw the unmistakable silhouette of a shark. I froze, trying to remember every survival tip I'd ever read. Before I could move, the shark swam away, uninterested. I bolted for the shore as fast as I could, my heart pounding the entire time. Once I was safe on the sand, I looked out at the water and saw nothing but calm waves. Some people thought I imagined it, but I know what I saw. That's the last time I swim anywhere without lifeguards. Story 46. I was at a theme park with my little cousin, and we decided to ride one of those spinning teacup rides. Everything was fine until a bolt of lightning struck nearby, and the power went out mid-spin. Our teacup jerked to a stop so suddenly that I almost flew out of it. The ride operator yelled for everyone to stay seated, but I noticed the teacup next to us was tilting dangerously. My cousin was screaming, and I grabbed him just in case. Thankfully, nothing tipped over, and they got us off the ride safely. But for the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been seconds away from a disaster. Story 47. I was helping my neighbor chop down a dead tree in his yard. We tied a rope to the trunk to control where it would fall, but apparently neither of us tied it well enough. As soon as the tree started falling, it went the opposite direction, straight toward his house. I was standing way too close and didn't realize it until the last second. My neighbor grabbed me by the shirt and yanked me out of the way as the tree smashed into his garden shed. No one was hurt, but his shed looked like a pancake. He just laughed and said, "Guess I needed a new one anyway." Story 48. I was visiting my grandparents and decided to take their old rowboat out on the lake. The water was calm, and everything seemed peaceful until I noticed the boat was taking on water. Apparently, there was a crack in the hull that no one had noticed. I panicked and started rowing back to shore, but the boat was sinking faster than I could move. Just as the water reached my knees, a guy on a fishing boat saw me and came to tow me in. My grandparents thought it was hilarious, but I've avoided rowboats ever since. Edit. My grandma still jokes about how even the fish were laughing when I sank that boat. Story 49. I was hiking alone in the woods, enjoying the quiet, when I heard a loud rustling in the bushes. I froze, expecting to see a deer or maybe a bear. But instead, a massive tree branch snapped and came crashing down right where I'd been standing seconds earlier. I didn't even hear it creaking before it fell. It was like nature just decided to test my reflexes. My heart was racing, and I spent the rest of the hike jumping at every sound. That was the last solo hike I ever attempted. Story 50. I was sitting in traffic on the freeway when I noticed the car in the lane next to me was swerving. Suddenly, it veered hard, slammed into the median, and flipped. My immediate instinct was to get out and help, but then I realized the car was sliding toward mine. I threw my car into reverse and backed up just in time to avoid getting hit. The driver of the flipped car crawled out through the window and was somehow unharmed. They gave me a thumbs up before the paramedics arrived. I drove home shaken, but grateful I'd reacted fast enough. Story 51. I was on a boat with my friend's family, enjoying a sunny day on the lake. We decided to anchor near a small island to swim. As I jumped into the water, I felt something snag my ankle. Looking down, I realized I'd gotten tangled in a piece of fishing line someone had left behind. I panicked and started flailing, which only made it worse. My friend noticed and dove in to help untangle me. It felt like forever, but he managed to cut the line with his dive knife. When we got back on the boat, his dad said, "Good thing we brought the first aid kit." I laughed nervously, but the truth is, I've stayed out of lakes ever since. Story 52. I was walking through the city one night after a late shift at work. It was quiet, and the streets were nearly empty. I reached an intersection and was about to cross when I heard a car engine revving. Out of nowhere, a car sped through the red light, missing me by inches. If I'd stepped off the curb half a second earlier, I would have been flattened. The driver didn't even stop, just kept going like nothing happened. I stood there for a while, trying to process how close I'd come to not making it home that night. Story 53. I was camping with some friends in the mountains. One night, while we were sitting around the campfire, we heard rustling in the bushes. At first we thought it was just a small animal, but then a bear emerged, sniffing the air. We all froze, and someone whispered, "Don't move." The bear got closer, sniffed the cooler we'd stupidly left out, and started rummaging through it. After what felt like hours, it took a bag of chips and wandered off. We didn't sleep much that night, and I haven't been camping without bear spray since. Edit. My friend still jokes that it wasn't the chips the bear wanted. It was me. Real funny, right? Story 54. I was driving on a highway during a rainstorm, and the visibility was terrible. As I passed an 18-wheeler, I hit a patch of standing water and hydroplaned. My car spun out and slid toward the guardrail, and I braced for impact. Miraculously, the car stopped inches away from the rail. The truck driver stopped to check on me and said, "You're lucky. It could have been much worse." I nodded, still shaking, and decided to wait out the storm before driving any further. Story 55. I was walking my dog in the park when she started barking at something in the grass. I thought it was a squirrel or another dog, but then I saw it. A snake. Not just any snake, but a rattlesnake, coiled and ready to strike. My dog was still barking, getting too close for comfort, so I scooped her up and backed away slowly. The snake stayed in place, rattling, until we were far enough away. I've never been more grateful for her loud, obnoxious barking. It probably scared the snake enough to stay put instead of chasing us. Story 56. I was on a college trip to a canyon, and one of the guides thought it'd be fun to take us off the main trail to explore. The terrain got steeper, and I slipped on loose gravel, sliding toward the edge of a drop-off. My heart stopped as I scrambled for something to hold on to. One of the other students grabbed my backpack strap and hauled me back just before I went over. The guide laughed it off, saying, "That's why you stay alert." I spent the rest of the trip gripping rocks like they were my lifeline. No more off-trail adventures for me. Story 57. I was fixing my bike in the driveway when my neighbor's car started rolling backward toward me. Their toddler had somehow shifted it into neutral. I didn't notice until the car was almost on top of me. I froze, completely stunned, when my other neighbor ran out of nowhere and jumped into the car, slamming on the brakes. He looked at me and said, "Don't just stand there next time." Lesson learned. Always be aware of your surroundings. Story 58. I was at a music festival, squeezed in with thousands of people near the main stage. Suddenly, a wave of pushing started from the back of the crowd. It got worse quickly, and I couldn't move. I felt like I was going to be crushed when someone grabbed my arm and pulled me into a side gap near a security barricade. The person didn't even say anything, just nodded and disappeared back into the crowd. I stayed by the barricade for the rest of the set, trying to process how close I'd come to disaster. Edit. Now, I always pay for VIP tickets with extra space. Crowds aren't worth the risk. Story 59. I was learning to drive and decided to practice parallel parking on a quiet street. Everything was going fine until I accidentally hit the gas instead of the brake. The car lurched forward, heading straight for a parked car. I yanked the wheel and somehow avoided hitting anything, but my instructor looked at me like I'd just committed a federal crime. He calmly said, "Let's take a break." I still haven't mastered parallel parking. Story 60. I was walking in the woods behind my house, enjoying the peace and quiet, when I heard a low growl. I turned around slowly and saw a coyote about 10 feet away. It wasn't alone. 2 more were right behind it. I started backing away, keeping eye contact, until I tripped over a tree root and fell. Just as I thought they were going to pounce, a loud noise echoed through the woods. A hunter nearby had fired a warning shot. The coyotes scattered, and I ran home without looking back. That was the last time I wandered in the woods alone. Story 61. I was walking my usual route to work, which included crossing an old bridge. The city had been repairing it for months, but I figured it was safe since the construction barriers were down. Halfway across, I heard a loud crack and felt the bridge shift under my feet. I froze, heart pounding, as the middle section of the bridge sagged. A construction worker on the other side yelled, "Run!" I didn't think twice. I bolted back the way I came just as part of the bridge gave out and crashed into the river below. Later, I found out it wasn't officially open yet. Now I triple-check signs before trusting open walkways. Story 62. It was a typical lazy Sunday, and I decided to finally fix a leaky faucet in my kitchen. While I was under the sink, fiddling with the pipes, I heard a faint hissing sound. At first I thought it was water, but then I smelled gas. Panicking, I crawled out and checked the stove. It was off. I ran outside and called for help. The gas company found a leak in the line right under my house. They told me if I'd lit the stove or even a candle, it could have been catastrophic. Now, every little smell freaks me out. Story 63. I was at a beach bonfire with friends when one of them thought it'd be hilarious to throw a plastic bottle into the flames. The fire started popping and hissing, and suddenly, molten plastic shot out like lava. A chunk landed on the sand right where I'd been sitting seconds earlier. Everyone laughed nervously, but I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to getting burned. Now, I have a strict no stupidity near fires rule when hanging out with friends. Edit. That friend later apologized by gifting me fireproof gloves as a joke. Real funny. Story 64. I was skiing for the first time and decided to take on a beginner slope. Halfway down, I lost control and started picking up speed. I didn't know how to stop, and the trees were getting closer. Just when I thought I was going to crash, I hit a snowbank and flipped into a pile of fresh powder. My friends, who were waiting at the bottom, cheered like I'd done it on purpose. Meanwhile, I was lying there, trying to catch my breath and process how I hadn't broken every bone in my body. Story 65. I was driving through the mountains late at night when I hit a patch of black ice. My car spun out of control and slid toward the edge of a cliff. I braced for impact, certain I was about to go over, but the car miraculously stopped inches from the edge. I sat there shaking for what felt like forever, before finally calling for a tow truck. The driver joked, "You must have 9 lives." I'm pretty sure I used up at least 3 of them that night. Story 66. I was flying home from a business trip, seated near the wing of the plane. About an hour into the flight, the plane hit turbulence. Bad turbulence. People were gasping, drinks were spilling, and I was gripping the armrest like it was a life preserver. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and I saw something fall off the wing. Panic set in as the plane dipped sharply, but the pilot came on the intercom and calmly assured us it was under control. We made an emergency landing at the nearest airport, and it turns out the bang was just a piece of loose paneling, not something critical. Still, every time I fly now, I pick a seat far from the wing. Story 67. I was helping my friend move into her new apartment when we realized the fridge wasn't plugged in. Easy fix, right? Wrong. I reached behind the fridge to grab the plug and felt a sharp jolt. Turns out, there was an exposed wire, and I just shocked myself. My hand was numb, and I stumbled back, feeling lightheaded. My friend freaked out and called an electrician, who said the wiring was so old it was a miracle the fridge hadn't started a fire. Now I let professionals handle anything involving electricity. Story 68. I was at the zoo with my family, watching the lion enclosure, when one of the lions suddenly charged at the glass barrier. The impact was so loud that everyone nearby jumped back. The glass held, but the zookeeper later told us that particular lion had a habit of testing the barriers. Knowing that didn't make it any less terrifying. I don't stand too close to enclosures anymore, no matter how safe they seem. Edit. My little brother now calls me Scaredy Cat every time we visit the zoo. Thanks, kid. Story 69. I was surfing for the first time and feeling pretty confident after catching a couple of small waves. Then, out of nowhere, a massive wave appeared. I paddled hard to get over it, but I wiped out. The force of the wave pulled me under, and I couldn't figure out which way was up. Just as I started to panic, my surfboard's leash yanked me toward the surface. Gasping for air, I climbed back on the board and paddled to shore, shaken but unharmed. The instructor said, "Good wipeout. You're officially a surfer now." I wasn't so sure. Story 70. I was cleaning out my attic when I noticed a weird stain on the ceiling. Thinking it was just old water damage, I poked at it with a broomstick. Big mistake. The ceiling caved in, and a massive wasp nest fell to the floor. Wasps went everywhere, buzzing angrily as I bolted down the stairs. I locked myself in the bathroom and called an exterminator, who laughed when I explained what happened. "You're lucky you didn't get stung," he said. "Yeah, I'll be staying out of the attic from now on." Story 71. I was kayaking down a calm river, enjoying the solitude, when I heard a distant roar. The river ahead had turned into rapids, and I had no idea how to navigate them. My kayak hit a rock, flipped, and I was tossed into the water. The current was stronger than I expected, dragging me toward more rocks. Just when I thought I was done for, a branch from a fallen tree snagged my life vest. I grabbed it and held on for dear life until I managed to pull myself out of the water and onto the riverbank. Shaking and soaked, I decided that was the last solo kayaking trip I'd ever take. Story 72. I was hiking with a friend when we spotted a small cave off the trail. Curiosity got the better of us, so we decided to check it out. As soon as we stepped inside, we heard a low growl. My stomach dropped when I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at us. It was a cougar. We froze, too terrified to move. After what felt like forever, the cougar turned and disappeared deeper into the cave. We backed out slowly and sprinted back to the main trail. My friend laughed nervously and said, "Well, that was close." I didn't find it funny. Story 73. I was in my apartment cooking dinner when I heard a loud pop. The kitchen lights flickered, and then I saw smoke coming from behind the stove. I panicked, grabbed a fire extinguisher, and sprayed like my life depended on it. The smoke stopped, but when the electrician came later, he said the wiring was so bad that the whole thing could have caught fire. I've never been so glad to own a fire extinguisher. Edit. My landlord said, "Guess I'll have to replace the stove." Guess? It nearly turned my kitchen into a bonfire. Story 74. I was on a road trip through the mountains, and the GPS told me to take a shortcut. The road got narrower and steeper, but I kept going, thinking it would connect back to the highway. Suddenly, a huge boulder rolled onto the road ahead, blocking my path. I hit the brakes just in time to avoid smashing into it. With no way to go forward or turn around, I had to reverse all the way down the steep, winding road. It was the most nerve-wracking drive of my life, and I'm pretty sure I took 10 years off my car's brakes. Story 75. I was at a carnival, walking past the rides, when I noticed one of the roller coasters making a weird grinding noise. As I stood there watching, a bolt shot out of the track and landed near my feet. I backed away quickly, and seconds later, the ride shut down. The operator told everyone to evacuate, saying it was just routine maintenance. Routine? That bolt missed me by inches, and I haven't trusted carnival rides since. Story 76. I was at a friend's pool party, and everyone decided to try diving off the high board. Feeling adventurous, I climbed up even though I'm terrified of heights. As I stood there trying to psych myself up, someone behind me shouted, "Just jump already!" Startled, I lost my balance and fell. Not in a graceful dive, but a flailing, unplanned belly flop. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a second, I thought I was drowning. Thankfully, someone pulled me to the edge, and I coughed up enough water to refill the pool. I spent the rest of the party avoiding the high board and sipping soda like nothing happened. Story 77. I was at the park flying a kite with my niece when the wind picked up. The kite started pulling harder than I expected, and before I knew it, the string snapped. The kite flew away, and I ran after it, not watching where I was going. I tripped over a tree root and tumbled into a muddy ditch. My niece was laughing so hard she couldn't breathe, and I ended up walking home looking like I'd been wrestling pigs. The kite? It got stuck in a tree, mocking me the whole way back. Story 78. I was walking home at dusk when I noticed a large dog without a leash following me. At first I thought it was friendly, but then it started growling and baring its teeth. I froze, unsure what to do, until a car drove by and honked loudly. The dog startled and ran off, leaving me standing there, heart pounding. I've never been so grateful for random traffic. Now I carry pepper spray, just in case. Edit. My mom joked that I should have carried bacon. Thanks, Mom. I'm sure that would have helped. Story 79. I was working late in my office when the building's fire alarm went off. Assuming it was a drill, I grabbed my things and headed for the exit. But when I opened the stairwell door, I saw smoke. My heart sank as I realized this was the real deal. I rushed down the stairs, but halfway down, I heard a loud crack, and the lights went out. I tripped, but managed to catch myself on the railing. A firefighter met me at the bottom and guided me out. Turns out, an electrical fire had knocked out part of the system. I was fine, but I'll never brush off fire alarms again. Story 80. I was riding my bike on a quiet street when I noticed a car coming toward me. I thought the driver saw me, but then they started turning, right into my path. I hit the brakes hard and skidded, barely missing the car's bumper. The driver rolled down the window, muttered, "Sorry," and drove off. My bike was fine, but my hands were shaking so much I had to sit down on the curb for a while. That was the day I invested in a neon safety vest and the loudest bike bell I could find. Story 81. I was hiking a new trail with some friends, and everything was going great until we got to a narrow ridge. The path was only a few feet wide, with a sheer drop on one side and loose gravel on the other. As I carefully stepped forward, my foot slipped on the gravel, and I started sliding toward the edge. My friend grabbed my backpack and pulled me back just in time. I sat there for a solid 5 minutes, too shaken to move. When we finally got off the ridge, my friend joked, "Maybe stick to flat trails next time." I didn't argue. Story 82. I was on a ferry ride across a lake when a sudden storm hit. The waves grew so big they started crashing over the sides of the boat. People were panicking, and the captain announced we were heading back to shore immediately. As the ferry rocked violently, I held onto the rail, convinced we were going to capsize. Somehow, The crew managed to steer us through the storm and back to safety. When we docked, the captain calmly said, "Sorry about that, folks." Sorry? I felt like I'd just survived a scene from a disaster movie. Story 83. I was babysitting my nephew, who was obsessed with climbing everything. I turned my back for 2 seconds, and he'd somehow scaled the kitchen counter to grab a cookie jar. As I ran over to stop him, the jar tipped over, and he started falling backward. I managed to catch him before he hit the floor, but the jar shattered everywhere. My nephew just laughed and said, "I got the cookie!" Meanwhile, I was having a minor heart attack. Edit. Now he calls me Aunt Catcher, like I'm a superhero. Maybe I'll put that on my resume. Story 84. I was taking a shortcut through an alley on my way home when I noticed someone walking behind me. At first I thought nothing of it, but they started speeding up. My gut told me to run, so I bolted out of the alley and into a busy street. When I glanced back, the person had stopped and turned the other way. I'll never know if they were just in a hurry or had bad intentions, but I've avoided dark alleys ever since. Story 85. I was at an outdoor concert with a friend when a storm rolled in. Everyone started scattering as lightning lit up the sky. We were running for the car when I heard a loud crack and felt my hair stand on end. A bolt of lightning had struck a tree just a few feet away, splitting it in half. The force knocked us off our feet, but we were okay. My friend looked at me and said, "Guess the universe didn't want us to hear the encore." Yeah, no argument there. Story 86. I was biking along a scenic trail when I decided to take a shortcut through the woods. It seemed like a good idea until the path got narrow and rocky. My front tire hit a large stone, and I went flying over the handlebars. As I braced for impact, I landed in a bush instead of the jagged rocks lining the trail. The thorns scratched me up, but nothing was broken. A passing hiker helped pull me out and said, "Good thing that bush was there." Yeah, I owe my life to some overgrown shrubbery. Lesson learned. Stick to paved paths. Story 87. I was visiting a friend who lived in a high-rise apartment with a balcony overlooking the city. While we were chatting, I leaned on the railing, which felt a little loose. I mentioned it to my friend, and she shrugged, saying, "It's fine." Moments later, I heard a loud creak, and the railing shifted under my weight. I jumped back just as part of it detached and fell 10 stories to the ground. We both stared in shock before she muttered, "Maybe I should call maintenance." Maybe. I spent the rest of the visit indoors, far from the balcony. Story 88. I was at a carnival, riding the Ferris wheel with a couple of friends. Everything was fine until we reached the top, and the ride suddenly stopped. At first we laughed it off, but then the wind picked up and the whole car started swaying. One of the bolts holding the door looked loose, and we panicked, holding onto each other. After what felt like an eternity, the ride started moving again, and we made it down safely. The operator apologized, blaming a temporary glitch. Temporary? That's the last time I ride anything that leaves the ground. Edit. My friends now call me Bolt Inspector every time we go to a carnival. Funny, but I'm not laughing. Story 89. I was out for a jog in the park when a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Lightning lit up the sky and thunder boomed so loudly it felt like the ground shook. I decided to take a shortcut home, cutting across an open field. Halfway through, I saw a flash of light and felt my hair stand on end. I froze as a lightning bolt struck a tree just a few feet away. The impact sent bark flying everywhere, but I was unharmed. I sprinted the rest of the way home, vowing to check the weather before running again. Story 90. I was helping my cousin move into their new house, and one of the boxes was labeled "Fragile." Naturally, I assumed it was something important, so I carried it extra carefully. As I stepped onto the porch, I tripped over a loose floorboard. The box flew out of my hands, and I landed on the ground. I expected to see broken glass everywhere, but the box was fine. It had been filled with pillows. My cousin laughed and said, "Guess the label worked." Meanwhile, I limped inside, questioning all my life choices. Story 91. I was hiking a steep trail with a group of friends, trying to keep up despite the loose rocks making it tricky. About halfway up, The person in front of me accidentally kicked a rock loose, and it came tumbling down. I didn't even have time to move. It hit me square in the shoulder and knocked me off balance. I fell backward, sliding a few feet before grabbing a branch to stop myself. My friends rushed to help, and thankfully, the worst I got was a bruised shoulder. The guide later said, "Good reflexes." Reflexes? I'm pretty sure it was pure luck. Story 92. I was driving to work on a foggy morning when I saw brake lights ahead. Traffic slowed, but I didn't see what was causing the backup. As I got closer, I realized a deer was standing in the middle of the road, frozen in place. I hit the brakes just in time, skidding slightly but stopping before I hit it. The car behind me wasn't so lucky. They swerved and ended up in the ditch, though no one was hurt. The deer finally wandered off like nothing had happened, leaving us all shaken. Story 93. I was at an amusement park standing in line for a roller coaster when I heard a loud crash. A section of the track had come loose while an empty test car was running. The staff evacuated the area and assured us it was just a minor issue, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I left the park early, deciding roller coasters weren't worth the risk. Edit. My friend texted me later to say the ride reopened an hour after I left. Yeah, no thanks. I'll stick to bumper cars. Story 94. I was helping a neighbor paint their garage, standing on a rickety ladder because they didn't have a proper one. As I leaned over to reach a corner, the ladder wobbled and tipped. I fell straight into a pile of cardboard boxes they'd been planning to recycle. Somehow, I didn't get a single scratch. My neighbor said, "Guess the universe wanted you to clean those up." Funny, but I'll be investing in a sturdy ladder for myself. Story 95. I was kayaking in the ocean when I noticed a shadow moving under the water. At first I thought it was just a big fish, but then I realized it was a shark. It circled my kayak a couple of times before disappearing. I paddled back to shore so fast I could have won a medal. The lifeguard on the beach said, "They usually don't bother kayakers." Usually? That's not as comforting as they think it is. I haven't been back in the ocean since. Story 96. I was at a picnic with my family, sitting on a blanket under a tree, when I heard a loud creak. I looked up just in time to see a massive branch falling directly toward me. I froze, completely stunned, but my cousin lunged and pushed me out of the way. The branch hit the ground right where I'd been sitting, sending dirt and leaves flying everywhere. My cousin laughed nervously and said, "You owe me lunch for that one." Safe to say, I moved my picnic spot to the middle of an open field after that. Story 97. I was working late at the office, the last one there, when the lights flickered and went out. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight and started heading to the door, but I heard a faint rustling sound. My heart raced as I crept toward the noise, expecting the worst. It turned out to be the janitor, who had come in through the back entrance and startled me unintentionally. He laughed and said, "Didn't mean to scare you." I laughed too, but I definitely drove home with all my doors locked and checked under my bed that night. Story 98. I was biking along a busy road when a car door swung open right in front of me. I swerved hard and ended up tumbling into the curb. My bike was scratched up, and I had a nasty scrape on my knee, but it could have been so much worse if I'd hit the door head on. The driver apologized, saying, "I didn't see you." Now I ride with a neon vest and a horn that could wake the dead. Edit. My friends tease me by calling me traffic cone, but hey, at least I'm visible. Story 99. I was cooking dinner and decided to light a candle for ambience. A few minutes later, I noticed the edge of the tablecloth had caught fire. Panicking, I grabbed a glass of water and threw it on the flames, which thankfully went out immediately. The fire didn't spread, but the tablecloth was ruined, and my heart was racing for hours. Lesson learned. Candles and fabric don't mix. Now I stick to LED lights for ambiance. Story 100. I was hiking with my dog in a forest I didn't know well. We wandered off the main trail to explore, and before I realized it, we were lost. My phone had no signal, and it was getting dark. Just as I started to panic, my dog barked and ran ahead. I followed him and found he'd led us back to the main trail. I've never been so grateful for his instincts or his obsession with finding the quickest way home. Story 101. I was driving through the countryside late at night when my tire suddenly blew out. I pulled over to the side of the road, but I was in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. As I was trying to figure out how to change the tire in the dark, a car pulled up behind me. At first I was nervous, but the driver turned out to be a local farmer who just happened to be passing by. He had tools and even a spare tire that fit my car. After helping me get back on the road, he waved me off with a simple, "Be careful out here." I'll never forget his kindness. Story 102. I was at a ski resort, trying snowboarding for the first time. Everything was going fine until I accidentally went down a slope that was way beyond my skill level. I picked up too much speed and couldn't stop, hurtling toward a group of people near the base. Just as I thought I was going to crash into them, I hit a snowbank and flipped into a pile of powder. The only thing hurt was my pride. One of the instructors came over, laughing, and said, "Nice dismount." Yeah, sure, totally planned. Story 103. I was on a cruise with my family, relaxing by the pool, when the ship suddenly started tilting slightly. At first it felt like a normal wave, but the tilt got worse. People started grabbing onto railings and chairs, and a few drinks slid off tables. Just as panic started to set in, the captain made an announcement that there had been a minor steering issue, and everything was under control. Minor? I didn't relax until the ship docked. Edit. My dad still jokes about how I almost slid into the buffet line. Hilarious, Dad. Story 104. I was taking my dog for a walk near a frozen lake when he suddenly bolted toward the water. Before I could stop him, he ran onto the ice, which immediately started cracking under his weight. I called him back, and thankfully, he turned around just in time. The ice broke the moment he got back to the shore. My dog was completely unfazed, but I was shaking for the rest of the day. Now I keep him on a leash during winter walks. Story 105. I was at a beach bonfire with some friends when the wind suddenly picked up. Sparks flew everywhere, and one of them landed on a towel near the fire. The towel caught flame instantly, and everyone started panicking. I grabbed a bucket of water we'd been using to rinse off sand and dumped it on the flames before they spread. Crisis averted, but it was a close call. Now I'm the safety officer every time we have a bonfire. Story 106. I was hiking in a dense forest with my friends when we decided to explore an unmarked trail. It started off fine, but soon the path disappeared entirely, and we were left wandering. As the sun started to set, we realized we were lost. To make matters worse, we started hearing rustling in the bushes. At first we thought it was just the wind, but then we saw movement, something big. Panic set in, and we started walking faster, hoping to find the main trail. Suddenly, my friend spotted a wooden marker pointing us back to safety. We practically ran all the way back to the car, hearts racing. Lesson learned: stick to marked trails. Story 107. I was walking through a crowded city street when I felt someone tug at my backpack. I turned around to see a guy bolting away with my wallet in hand. Instinctively, I shouted and started chasing him. Out of nowhere, another passerby stepped in and tackled the thief to the ground. They handed my wallet back, saying, "Be more careful next time." The thief ran off, but I was just relieved to have my wallet back. Now I keep my valuables in my front pocket. Story 108. I was kayaking with my cousin on a lazy river, enjoying the calm water. Out of nowhere, a large log floated into my path, and I didn't notice it until it was too late. The kayak tipped over, and I found myself in the water, clinging to the overturned boat. My cousin paddled over, laughing, and helped me flip it back. Thankfully, the water wasn't deep, but my phone didn't survive the dunk. Now I keep everything in waterproof bags. Lesson learned the wet way. Edit. My cousin bought me a waterproof phone case for Christmas and said, "For next time." Very funny. Story 109. I was visiting a wildlife sanctuary, admiring the animals from a safe distance. Suddenly, one of the ostriches near the fence started pecking aggressively at the barrier, staring directly at me. Before I could move, it managed to stretch its neck over the fence and snap at my hat, knocking it off my head. The guide laughed and said, "They like shiny things." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or run, but I stayed far away from that enclosure for the rest of the day. Story 110. I was learning how to skateboard with a group of friends, feeling pretty good about mastering the basics. That confidence evaporated when I tried to ride down a small hill. My board wobbled, and I completely lost control, flying off and landing hard on the grass beside the path. My friends came running, but I was more embarrassed than hurt. One of them said, "Well, at least you didn't hit the pavement." Now I stick to flat surfaces. No more hills for me. Story 111. I was driving home late at night on a winding mountain road when my car headlights caught the reflection of something on the road. As I got closer, I realized it was a large boulder that must have fallen during a recent storm. I swerved just in time, narrowly missing it, but my car skidded toward the edge of the road. Thankfully, the guardrail held, and I managed to stop. I sat there for a few minutes, heart racing, before calling for roadside assistance. Now I'm extra cautious driving at night, especially in the mountains. Story 112. I was at a carnival with friends, waiting in line for the bumper cars, when one of the overhead lights started flickering. Suddenly, the entire ride lost power, and sparks flew from the control booth. Everyone panicked and backed away as the staff scrambled to shut everything down. Turns out, one of the power lines had short-circuited, and we were lucky it didn't cause a fire. The ride stayed closed for the rest of the night, but the smell of burnt wire still haunts me whenever I go to a carnival. Story 113. I was on a family vacation at a beach resort, swimming in the ocean while my siblings built sandcastles. Suddenly, I felt something brush against my leg. Looking down, I saw a large jellyfish floating right next to me. Panicking, I swam as fast as I could back to shore, narrowly avoiding its tentacles. When I told the lifeguard, he said, "Oh yeah, those come through here sometimes." Sometimes? That's the last time I swim without asking about the water conditions first. Edit. My family now refers to jellyfish as ocean ghosts because of how pale I went after that encounter. Story 114. I was walking through a city park when I noticed a group of pigeons near a fountain. One of them was limping, so I bent down to take a closer look. Big mistake. The rest of the pigeons apparently thought I had food and swarmed me. I tripped backward into the fountain, soaking myself from head to toe while the birds scattered. A little kid nearby laughed and said, "You're like a bird magnet." Thanks, kid. Now I avoid pigeons at all costs. Story 115. I was on a ladder cleaning the gutters of my house when I leaned too far to one side. The ladder started tipping, and I froze, realizing I was about to fall. Just as I braced myself, a strong gust of wind pushed the ladder back upright. I climbed down shakily, swearing I'd never do that again without someone holding the ladder. The gutters? They can wait until next year. Story 116. I was helping my neighbor trim the branches on a large tree in their yard. They handed me a long saw, and I climbed up a sturdy-looking ladder to reach the higher branches. Everything was fine until I cut through one of the heavier branches, and it swung down, knocking into the ladder. The ladder wobbled and started tipping, and I barely managed to jump off before it crashed into the ground. My neighbor shouted, "You okay?" while I sat there heart pounding. After that, we both agreed to leave the big branches to the professionals. Story 117. I was out jogging at dawn, my headphones blasting music, when I crossed a small bridge near my neighborhood. Just as I reached the middle, I felt the wooden boards shift under me, and one of them snapped completely. My foot went through the hole, and I stumbled forward, scraping my knees on the planks. Luckily, the bridge didn't collapse entirely, and I managed to pull myself free. When I reported it to the city, they said, "Oh, that bridge was due for repairs." You don't say. I've since found a new jogging route. Story 118. I was on a rollerblading trail with my cousin, showing off a bit by trying to skate backward. That confidence disappeared quickly when I hit a crack in the pavement and lost my balance. I fell flat on my back, knocking the wind out of myself. As I lay there staring at the sky, my cousin skated over and said, "That was almost cool. Thanks for the support. Now I wear every piece of protective gear possible when I skate." Edit. My cousin made a video of my fall and sent it to our family group chat with the caption, "Skate or crash, trying." It's still their favorite inside joke. Story 119. I was on a boat tour through some coastal caves with my family when the captain decided to get a little too close to the rocks for my comfort. As we entered one of the caves, the boat suddenly scraped against the wall, and everyone grabbed onto something for balance. The captain laughed it off, saying, "That's just a love tap." I wasn't laughing, especially when I saw chunks of rock falling into the water. We got out of the cave safely, but I spent the rest of the tour keeping my eyes on the emergency exits. Story 120. I was crossing a busy intersection on my bike when a car ran a red light, speeding right toward me. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just in time. The car missed me by inches, and the driver didn't even slow down. A pedestrian nearby shouted, "Are you okay?" while I tried to catch my breath. I made it home safely, but now I always double-check every intersection, even if I have the right of way. Story 121. I was driving home after a late shift when I noticed a truck swerving in and out of its lane ahead of me. I slowed down to keep my distance, but as I approached a sharp turn, the truck suddenly veered off the road and flipped into a ditch. My heart stopped as I pulled over and called 911. The driver managed to climb out, shaken but unharmed. He admitted he'd fallen asleep at the wheel. I stayed with him until the paramedics arrived, but I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd been to getting caught in that wreck. Story 122. I was at the gym using the treadmill when the fire alarm suddenly went off. Everyone started evacuating, but as I was heading toward the exit, I heard a loud pop and saw smoke coming from the weightlifting area. The sprinklers kicked on and people started panicking. I made it outside safely, but the fire department later said it was a minor electrical fire that could have been much worse if the sprinklers hadn't worked. Now I always make sure I know where the nearest exit is, just in case. Story 123. I was canoeing on a calm lake with my brother when we decided to paddle closer to the shore. As we approached, I noticed the water seemed murky, and before I could warn him, the canoe hit something underwater and tipped over. We both fell into the water, and I panicked when I felt something slimy brush against my leg. Turns out it was just a branch, but the experience was enough to convince me to wear a life vest every time I'm on the water, even if it's a calm lake. Edit. My brother still mocks me for shouting, "Sea monster," while flailing in 2 feet of water. Sibling love at its finest. Story 124. I was hiking a trail with a group when someone pointed out a rattlesnake just off the path. We stopped to take pictures from a safe distance, but as I leaned forward to get a better shot, I slipped on some loose gravel and almost fell toward the snake. Luckily, one of the guides grabbed my arm and steadied me before I could get too close. The guide calmly said, "That's why you don't take selfies with snakes." Lesson learned. Wildlife photography isn't worth risking your life. Story 125. I was at an outdoor concert standing near the stage when the crowd suddenly surged forward. I lost my balance and got pushed against the barricade, completely unable to move. For a terrifying moment, I couldn't breathe. But then a security guard reached over the barrier and pulled me out. They escorted me to the back of the venue, where I spent the rest of the concert watching from a safe distance. It wasn't the best view, but at least I wasn't crushed. Story 126. A few years ago, I was hiking alone in a national park when I decided to take an unmarked trail, because apparently I thought I was invincible. About an hour in, I heard a low growl behind me. Turning around, I saw a mountain lion staring me down like I was its next meal. My heart stopped. They always say not to run, but my legs had other plans. I bolted. Worst idea ever. It chased me, and I could hear its paws hitting the ground behind me. I scrambled up a tree, thinking I was safe, only to remember that mountain lions can climb. Brilliant. It started climbing up after me, and I panicked, fumbling for anything to throw. I grabbed my water bottle and hurled it. To my shock, the bottle hit the cat right on the nose, and it yelped, jumped down, and bolted into the woods. I didn't move for 2 hours, just clinging to that tree like it was my lifeline. When I finally climbed down, I sprinted back to the main trail and swore I'd never hike alone again. Too long. Didn't read. I nearly became a mountain lion's lunch because I thought I was invincible. Story 127. It was a normal day at work until the elevator broke down. I was trapped with 4 strangers, and everything was fine for about 5 minutes, until the lights flickered and we heard a loud creaking sound. Suddenly, the elevator dropped. We all screamed, grabbing onto the walls or each other like that would help. Thankfully, the emergency brakes kicked in, but we were stuck between floors. What made it worse? One of the guys was claustrophobic. He started hyperventilating, yelling that we were all going to die. Another person tried to calm him down, but then the lights went out completely. I was convinced this was the end. About 20 minutes later, we heard a loud noise and the elevator jolted back into motion, finally stopping at the lobby. When the doors opened, everyone ran out like their lives depended on it. I spent the rest of the day taking the stairs, no matter how many floors I had to climb. Edit. Looking back, I realized I never even got the names of those people. We survived together, but I don't even know who to thank for helping me not completely lose it. Story 128. Last year, I went skydiving for the first time. Everything was fine, until it wasn't. I jumped out of the plane, felt the rush of wind and pulled the cord for my parachute. Nothing. My heart dropped faster than I did. I yanked at the backup cord, and guess what? That didn't work either. At this point, I was spiraling toward the ground at terminal velocity, thinking, well, this is it. Then my instructor, who had jumped after me, managed to catch up. He grabbed onto me and deployed his parachute, saving both of us. We landed hard, but alive. The whole thing was over in less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. Now, whenever someone asks if I'd go skydiving again, I just laugh and say, I've used up all my luck already. Story 129. I was driving home late one night when I hit a patch of black ice. My car spun out of control, sliding across the road and straight toward a massive tree. I thought, this is how it ends. But at the last second, my car hit a small snowbank, slowing it down just enough to avoid slamming into the tree head-on. When I finally stopped, I sat there in shock, gripping the steering wheel like it owed me an explanation. A passing car pulled over, and the driver asked if I was okay. I nodded, even though my hands were shaking so much I couldn't start the engine again. After that night, I drive like a grandma whenever there's even a hint of snow. Too long. Didn't read. Black ice is no joke, and I'm lucky to be alive. Story 130. A couple of years ago, I was working at a coffee shop when a guy came in acting really sketchy. He kept looking over his shoulder and muttering to himself. I was about to call my manager when he pulled out a gun and demanded the cash from the register. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely punch in the code to open it. But here's the crazy part. As he's grabbing the money, a customer in the corner suddenly stood up, threw their hot coffee right at his face, and tackled him to the ground. It was like something out of a movie. The police showed up minutes later and arrested the guy. Afterward, the customer just shrugged and said, I hate lukewarm coffee anyway. It was the most terrifying moment of my life, but also the most surreal. Now, every time I smell coffee, I think about how it might have saved my life. Story 131. A couple of years ago, I was walking my dog late at night when I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just another dog owner, but the steps were too slow and deliberate. I glanced back and saw a man in a hoodie walking a little too close. My heart started pounding. I picked up my pace, but so did he. My dog, usually the friendliest Labrador on the planet, suddenly stopped and growled, baring his teeth. I've never seen him act like that. The man froze, staring at my dog, then turned and walked away without saying a word. I rushed home, locked the door, and sat there shaking while my dog wagged his tail like nothing had happened. I still don't know what that guy wanted, but I'm convinced my dog scared him off. Too long. Didn't read. My goofy Labrador might have saved me from something really bad. Story 132. I was on a cruise with my family when we decided to go snorkeling at a small private island. Everything was beautiful. Clear water, colorful fish, until I swam a little too far from the group. Suddenly, I felt something brush against my leg. I looked down and saw a massive shadow. It was a shark. I froze, trying to remember everything I'd read about staying calm. Easier said than done. The shark circled me once, then swam away, uninterested. I've never been so relieved in my life. When I got back to the boat, I didn't tell anyone, because I didn't want to ruin their day. But later, when we were having dinner, someone else said they'd seen a shark too. I just nodded and kept quiet, thinking, yep, we've had a moment, that shark and I. Story 133. One time I got caught in a rip current while swimming at the beach. It dragged me so far out that I couldn't see the shore anymore. I tried to swim back, but the current was too strong. At some point, I just floated, trying to conserve energy, and that's when I spotted a lifeguard heading toward me. It felt like forever, but he finally reached me, pulled me onto his board, and got us both back to safety. I couldn't stop thanking him. Later, he told me that floating was the only thing that saved me, because fighting the current would have exhausted me. Edit. After that day, I've become the person who lectures everyone about beach safety. My friends roll their eyes, but hey, I've got first-hand experience. Story 134. When I was in college, my friends and I went camping in a remote area. Around midnight, we heard something rustling outside our tent. We thought it was just a raccoon or something, so we ignored it, until the zipper of the tent started moving. We freaked out, yelling, and one of my friends grabbed a frying pan as a weapon. When we finally worked up the courage to unzip the tent, we found a bear sniffing around our campfire. It didn't even look at us, just grabbed a bag of marshmallows and lumbered off. We packed up and left that night. Too long. Didn't read. A bear stole our marshmallows, and we decided we weren't cut out for the wilderness. Story 135. I was on a flight during a terrible storm, and the turbulence was so bad that people were screaming. Drinks spilled everywhere, the lights flickered, and I was gripping the armrest so hard I thought I'd snap it off. At one point, the plane dropped so suddenly that it felt like we were on a roller coaster. The flight attendants tried to stay calm, but you could see the panic in their eyes. Just when I thought we were about to crash, the pilot came over the intercom, sounding annoyingly calm, and said, "Just a little rough air, folks. Nothing to worry about." Somehow, we landed safely, and everyone clapped like we'd just survived the apocalypse. I didn't stop shaking until I was off the plane. Now every time I hear someone complain about minor turbulence, I just laugh and think, you don't even know. Story 136. When I was 12, my friends and I decided to explore an abandoned house in our neighborhood. You know, classic dumb kid stuff. The place was falling apart, with creaky floors and walls covered in graffiti. We were daring each other to go into the basement when the floor gave out under me. I fell straight through to the basement, landing on a pile of debris. Luckily, nothing was broken, but I was scratched up and scared out of my mind. My friends started screaming, thinking I was seriously hurt. Then we all heard this loud groaning sound. It turned out to be a stray cat stuck in the basement with me, but for a moment, we were convinced the house was haunted. After some effort, my friends managed to pull me out. Edit. Looking back, I realized that my biggest mistake wasn't falling. It was lying to my mom about how I got those scratches. She found out anyway. Story 137. A couple of years ago, I was kayaking with a friend when we accidentally drifted too far out into the ocean. The waves started picking up, and before we knew it, we were stuck. No matter how hard we paddled, we couldn't get back to shore. We were both panicking, yelling for help, but there was no one around. Just as we were about to give up, a random fishing boat appeared out of nowhere. The fisherman saw us struggling, threw us a rope, and towed us back to safety. When we finally got back to the beach, the fisherman just said, "Next time, check the tide charts," and left. Now I never go near the water without triple-checking the weather. Too long. Didn't read. I owe my life to a grumpy fisherman and his boat. Story 138. I was biking home late at night when a car came speeding toward me, way too close for comfort. I swerved into a ditch, and the car didn't even slow down. As I was trying to get up, I realized I couldn't move my leg. I called for help, and a passing jogger stopped to assist. Turns out I had a minor fracture, and they stayed with me until the ambulance arrived. I never got their name, but I'll always remember their kindness. The next day, my bike looked like it had been through a war zone, but honestly, I was just grateful to be alive. Too long. Didn't read. Late-night biking is not worth the risk, no matter how cool you think you look. Story 139. During a summer road trip, My car broke down in the middle of nowhere. My phone had no signal, and the nearest town was miles away. To make things worse, it was getting dark. I was considering spending the night in my car when a pickup truck pulled over. The driver was this old guy with a huge dog riding shotgun. He offered to help, and even though every horror movie in my head screamed, "Don't trust him," I didn't have much choice. Turns out he was just a kind mechanic heading home. He towed my car back to his shop and got it running again. I offered to pay, but he waved me off, saying, "Just don't break down out here again." Now, every time someone offers me help, I remind myself not everyone is a villain in a horror story. Story 140. A few years ago, I was caught in a flash flood while driving home. The water rose so fast that my car stalled, and I was stuck. I climbed out through the window and onto the roof, trying to stay calm while the water kept rising. Out of nowhere, a guy in a kayak paddled up to me. I'm not even joking. A kayak. He threw me a rope, and I climbed into the kayak as my car disappeared under the water. He paddled us both to higher ground, and then he just said, "Good luck," and left. Now, I never ignore flood warnings, no matter how inconvenient they seem. Too long. Didn't read. A random guy in a kayak saved me from becoming fish food. Story 141. Last year, I decided to take a solo road trip across the country. I was driving through a desolate part of Arizona when my car suddenly broke down. No phone signal, no cars passing by, and no one around. I popped the hood, hoping for some miracle, but the engine was beyond my knowledge. I started walking down the road, thinking I'd have to hitchhike to the nearest town. After about half an hour, a beat-up van pulled up beside me. The driver rolled down his window and asked if I needed help. I was hesitant at first, but desperation won out. The guy turned out to be a mechanic passing through. He fixed my car in about 20 minutes and didn't charge me a dime. As I was about to leave, he told me, "Next time, don't get lost in the desert." I laughed it off, but I swear, he looked like he knew exactly how close I was to being in real trouble. Now, every time I take a long trip, I make sure my car's in top shape and that I'm not relying on random good Samaritans. Too long. Didn't read. I owe my life to a random mechanic in the middle of nowhere. Story 142. When I was a teenager, I worked as a lifeguard at a community pool. One day, I saw a little kid struggling in the deep end, flailing his arms and going under. I dove in immediately, but when I reached him, I realized he was completely limp and unresponsive. I tried to pull him to the surface, but he wasn't moving. In panic, I started yelling for help, and another lifeguard dove in to assist. We managed to get him out of the pool and started performing CPR. Just as I was about to give up, he coughed and gasped for air. I'll never forget that moment of relief. Later, his parents came by to thank us, and they kept calling me a hero. I just shrugged it off, but I couldn't shake the thought that if I'd been just a minute slower, it would have been too late. Edit. Every time I hear about someone drowning or being in a similar situation, it hits me hard. It's crazy how one small mistake can change everything. Story 143. I was on a plane to Europe for a vacation, and everything seemed fine until we hit some unexpected turbulence. The plane started shaking so violently, I thought we were going to fall apart. People were crying, and the flight attendants were doing their best to keep calm. Then, the pilot came on the intercom and said, "We're going through some rough air, folks. Please remain calm." I don't think anyone was calm after that, especially when the turbulence lasted for what felt like forever. At one point, we dropped so quickly, I thought my stomach was going to stay up in the air. But then, after what seemed like an eternity, the shaking stopped. The rest of the flight was smooth, and we landed safely. I swear, the second I touched the ground, I kissed the airport floor. I don't care how silly it looked, but I was just happy to be alive. Too long. Didn't read. Nearly went through the worst turbulence of my life, but somehow made it through without losing my lunch. Story 144. A few years ago, I was at a friend's house for a small gathering. I stepped outside for a moment to get some fresh air and found myself standing too close to the edge of a cliff overlooking a steep drop. I was distracted by my phone when I felt the ground give way under me. I wasn't even able to react before I fell a good 10 feet, hitting the rocks below. I was dizzy and couldn't move my legs, but I managed to crawl away from the edge before my body went into shock. Somehow, a guy who had been hiking nearby heard me and rushed down to help. He pulled me to safety and called for help. I ended up with a few broken bones and bruises, but nothing worse. To this day, I never get too close to any cliff or ledge. I also make sure to keep my phone in my pocket when I'm near dangerous areas. Too long. Didn't read. Nearly fell off a cliff, but a random hiker saved me. Story 145. When I was in college, my friends and I went on a weekend camping trip in the mountains. We set up our tents and built a campfire, and everything seemed perfect, until we heard the unmistakable sound of growling in the distance. We tried to ignore it, but the growls kept getting closer. I grabbed a flashlight, and when I shone it toward the noise, I saw the outline of a bear. I panicked, grabbing everything I could, and ran to the car. We drove away, but the bear followed us for a while. Once we were far enough, we pulled over, and that's when I realized something. I had left my backpack with all my food by the campfire. We didn't go back for it, though. No way was I risking another encounter. I learned my lesson the hard way. Too long. Didn't read. We had a bear scare on our camping trip, and I'll never leave food unattended again. Story 146. A few years ago, I was on a solo hiking trip in the Rockies. I had my map and supplies, but about halfway through, I lost track of the trail. After a couple of hours wandering in the woods, I realized I had no idea where I was. Panic set in. As I walked, I stumbled across what looked like an old abandoned cabin. Desperate for some sort of shelter, I knocked on the door. No answer. I tried the handle and found it unlocked. Inside, there was just an old dusty couch and a wood stove. Nothing threatening, but something felt off. I stayed there for the night, keeping the door locked. The next morning, I woke up to find the door slightly ajar and some food gone from my pack. My first thought was a bear or raccoon, but then I saw fresh footprints leading to the woods. I rushed out of there, hoping I wasn't intruding on someone else's territory. I eventually found the trail again, and later, a ranger told me the cabin had been abandoned for years. I've always wondered who or what was in there with me that night. Too long. Didn't read. I stayed in an abandoned cabin overnight, and I still have no idea who or what was in there with me. Story 147. During my junior year in high school, I was walking home from school when I noticed a guy following me. He wasn't overtly aggressive, but he kept his distance, just walking behind me for several blocks. I tried to shake him off by taking random turns, but no matter what I did, he stayed close. I started to panic and decided to cut through a park to get to a busier street. The guy sped up when he saw me veering off the main road. That's when I realized I wasn't just being paranoid. He was following me on purpose. Just as I started running, an older man on a bicycle appeared. He stopped when he saw me, and without saying a word, he turned and confronted the guy following me. The guy immediately backed off and took off running in the opposite direction. I thanked the cyclist, who simply nodded and rode away. To this day, I have no idea who he was, but I'm convinced he saved me. Edit. I still carry pepper spray now, just in case. The experience changed how I think about personal safety. Story 148. My friends and I were on a road trip to a music festival when we decided to take a shortcut through some back roads in Texas. The car started acting up, and we ended up in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service and a broken-down car. We tried flagging down passing cars, but no one stopped. We were starting to get seriously worried when a man in an old truck pulled over. He offered to help, but his truck was just as old and broken down as ours. He was friendly, though, and offered us water and snacks. He even gave us a spare tire and said he would drive us to the nearest town. We reluctantly accepted, but as we started driving, he kept asking strange questions about where we were headed and why. Then he told us about a shortcut that would get us to the festival faster. Suddenly, I felt really uneasy. I made up an excuse about needing to use the bathroom, and my friends and I quickly got out of the truck. We started walking away as fast as we could. The guy yelled after us, but we didn't look back. We finally made it to a gas station, where we called for help. I'll never forget that guy. Too long. Didn't read. Almost got trapped in a stranger's truck during a road trip. Trust your gut. Story 149. It was the last night of our camping trip, and we were sitting around the fire telling ghost stories. The night was clear, and there was barely a breeze, but then we heard footsteps outside our camp. We all stopped talking, and the weird tension filled the air. At first we thought it was another group of campers, but the steps didn't sound normal. They were heavy and deliberate, like someone, or something, was trying to be stealthy. The worst part? They stopped just outside the circle of light from our fire. We grabbed the nearest sticks, thinking it might be a bear or wild animal, but there was no growling or rustling, just silence. After what felt like hours, the footsteps started again, but this time they were moving away from us. We didn't sleep the rest of the night, and we packed up and left at dawn. The weirdest part? We never found any tracks, and no one was in the area when we left. Too long. Didn't read. Something creepy stalked us around the camp, and we never figured out what it was. Story 150. I was driving down a quiet road in the middle of the night when my car started making strange noises. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded on the side of the road. I was miles from the nearest town, and there was no way to call for help. Of course, my phone had no signal. I started walking to try to find a house or something when I saw headlights in the distance. A truck pulled up beside me, and the driver offered to give me a lift. I hesitated for a second, but figured I had no choice. The driver was an older man, and we talked about random stuff on the way. Then, he suddenly pulled over at what seemed like a random spot. He turned to me and said, "You're lucky I found you. A lot of people don't make it out here." I was about to ask what he meant when he quickly drove off, leaving me confused. A few days later, I heard on the news about a string of robberies that had happened on that same road. I still wonder if that guy was warning me, or something else entirely. Too long, didn't read, almost got caught in a bad situation, but an old man in a truck saved me. Story 151. I was visiting a small town for a weekend getaway when I decided to take a walk down a quiet street near my hotel. The houses were old, and the neighborhood had an eerie, forgotten feel to it. As I walked, I noticed a woman standing in the window of one of the houses. She was just staring out at me, unmoving. I smiled and waved, but she didn't respond. I shrugged it off and continued walking. But something about her stare sent a chill down my spine. I walked back past the house a few hours later, and she was still there. This time her face was pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and unblinking. I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing. I looked around, but there was no one else in the street. I decided to knock on the door, thinking maybe the woman was in distress, but no one answered. I went back to my hotel, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. Later, I asked the hotel clerk about the house, and she told me it had been abandoned for years. The woman I saw was probably just a figment of my imagination, or so I thought until the next day, when I saw the same woman standing in the same window of the same house. Too long. Didn't read. I saw a woman in an abandoned house, and now I'm convinced she was a ghost. Story 152. During a camping trip, my friends and I were sitting around the fire when we heard someone knocking on our tent. It was well past midnight, and there was no one else nearby. We all froze, unsure what to do. After a few seconds, we heard the knock again, louder this time. I grabbed a flashlight and unzipped the tent, half expecting to see some prankster or a bear. But there was nothing, just empty forest. I was about to zip the tent back up when I heard a voice behind me. "What are you doing out here?" I spun around, and there was a man standing about 10 feet away. He was wearing ragged clothes and had a wild look in his eyes. I tried to speak, but I was frozen. He didn't say anything else and just turned and walked away into the woods. We didn't sleep at all that night, and the next morning, we packed up and left early. When we told the rangers about it, they said there were no reports of anyone else being out there. We never found out who that man was, but I'll never go camping in that area again. Edit. I did some research when I got back, and apparently there were reports of strange people wandering the area for years. Definitely not something I want to experience again. Story 153. I was on a road trip through a remote part of the country when my car started overheating. I pulled over to the side of the road and popped the hood, but there was nothing I could do. I was miles away from the nearest town, with no cell signal and no other cars in sight. I started walking along the road, hoping to find help, when a man in a truck pulled up. He offered me a ride to the nearest gas station, and I gladly accepted. On the way there, we talked about random things. He was friendly, and I didn't feel threatened at all. But as we drove through a secluded part of the road, he suddenly turned to me and said, "You're lucky I found you. There are people out here who won't be so kind." His words were strange, but I didn't think much of it. When we arrived at the gas station, I thanked him and tried to pay for the ride, but he refused. He just smiled and said, "Take care." I never saw him again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Too long. Didn't read. Got a ride from a strange man in the middle of nowhere, and I'm still not sure if I was lucky or being watched. Story 154. A couple of years ago, I was working late at the office, and I decided to take a short walk outside to clear my head. It was a quiet night, and the streets were mostly empty. As I walked, I noticed a man standing across the street, just staring at me. I tried to ignore him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. As I crossed the street to get closer to him, I realized he hadn't moved a muscle. He was still standing perfectly still, just staring at me. I quickened my pace and turned a corner, hoping to lose him. But when I looked back, he was following me, still staring. At that point, I started to run, but no matter how fast I went, he was always just a few steps behind. I ducked into a nearby store, and when I looked out the window, the man was gone. I haven't seen him since, but every time I walk down that street, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there watching. Too long. Didn't read. Was stalked by a guy who wouldn't stop staring, and I'm still not sure if I was paranoid or if something was really wrong. Story 155. I was taking a road trip with my cousin when we decided to stop at a small diner in the middle of nowhere. It was an old-fashioned place, with a jukebox playing softly in the corner and a waitress who looked like she had been working there for decades. We ordered our food and sat by the window, but something felt off. The diner was completely empty except for the two of us and the waitress. As we ate, we noticed that the waitress was staring at us, never breaking eye contact. When we finished, we went to pay, but the waitress refused to take our money. "It's already been paid for," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Confused, we left the diner and drove off. But about 20 minutes down the road, we saw the same diner again, sitting on the side of the road. We couldn't believe our eyes. We had just left it. We turned around, but the diner was gone. There was nothing but open land and a stretch of highway. To this day, I have no idea what happened there. Too long. Didn't read. Had an eerie experience in a diner that shouldn't have existed.